G'day. Welcome to Fucking About in the Shed with Matt. Episode 1 for 2025. By the time you see this, it's going to be February. You can see in front of me, I've got a bunch of stuff here. I've been toying with the idea of making a router table for quite some time. And there's been some constraints, I guess, around how much it costs, where I'm going to put it, do I make a specific table for it, how often am I going to use it, what sort of machine. All of those things that you probably ask yourself when you give consideration to a similar sort of project. So I'm going to detail what I have been thinking. I've got some form ply here that's already been pre-cut because I've got a pretty good plan. I've spent a few weeks jotting down ideas. I've got some inspiration from other makers. And now I've collected all of my bits and pieces with the view of making my version of a router table. So the first thing that will stand out here among all of the bits and pieces is this scissor jack here. I lashed out and I spent 20 bucks and I bought a eBay jobby. Not sure I would trust that particular item under my car, but as suggested by a couple other makers, having a lift for your router itself is a really good idea, something very useful, and this strikes me as a relatively cheap way of getting that feature. This is the actual extraction. Right, so the first thing that will stand out here among all of the bits and pieces is this scissor jack here. I lashed out and I spent 20 bucks and I bought a eBay jobby. Not sure I would trust that particular item under my car, but as suggested by a couple other makers, having a lift for your router itself is a really good idea, something very useful, and this strikes me as a relatively cheap way of getting that feature. So far, everything else on the table here was in my shed. The form ply is recycled from 2 epoxy moulds. So I had to scrape some silicone off, and that's all been pre-cut to do what I want. The fittings you see here, they are all out of my box of fittings that has come from various vacuum cleaners and various kits and bits and pieces and stuff over years, because I throw nothing out. This is the actual extraction shroud and spanner for my Ryobi router, and I'm going to be using that one rather than the Audi Work Zone Special underneath, mostly because it has a 1/2 inch and a 1/4 inch or a 6 and 12 mil collet, so I can run bigger router bits. That is a thing that's necessary for me. If I only wanted, or I was happy with only using 1/4 inch or 6 mil router fittings, I would have done something using this table insert, which you bolt onto there somehow, and then I have a drop-in thing and then some shrouds and stuff. The Work Zone router table setup, for all of the things, pretty good value, but it's very much DIY. It's rickety as fuck, if I'm honest. The only thing I'm going to be taking out of this or off of that item is this. So this has your safety switch. It has a 240 volt plug under the flappy here. So this allows me to have a safety near my knee or somewhere on the new setup. The complicated component, if you will, of what I'm doing is I'm going to build a box using these bits here. The angle bits are bracing so that part of the box can be accessed to make adjustments on the router for, height and the speed and so on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in here. So this plastic it's probably ABS, is just bolted into the outriggers here on my Carbatec table saw. And if we come up here, we can see that's it's nearly 70 centimetres wide, and everything will sit underneath. There will be a hole somewhere here, which you'll see soon enough, and the router will bolt underneath. There will be a frame to hold the jack to lift it up and down. But the thing that has held me up, I guess, in thinking and planning the most is what I'm going to do for a fence. And I'm going to do this for a fence. So what we've got is this thing slides back and forth, as you can see, and when it's being a table saw, it comes all the way over here. What it also does is allow the opportunity to have a fixed fence where the distance from the working surface to the router bit can be adjusted to somewhat. So if my working space will be here, then I can put this to here, and then I can have a feed fence along here, and that will be useful. What I'm going to do is build it out slightly so I can have dust extraction behind the fence, and then there'll also be dust extraction underneath. The dust extraction underneath will actually be this jobby here, which again come from a kit of bits that came. It's had a brush on it, so I assume it was for sweeping or something. I've never used it, so it's been in the box. Pretty much a freebie that came with some flexible tube. Right, whilst building a cabinet or a box or anything pretty basic like this, it's probably within the wheelhouse of anyone who's got a cabinet saw or a table saw. I'm going to make a couple little notes. Firstly, put a pencil round, just a soft edge around the hole here for the router bit to come out of. This side has a 7mm recess, so I only lose 10mm of the router's functional depth, so the router will sit in this cavity. The router has a plastic base plate, which I'm going to take off, and underneath that base plate is access to the holes here, 2 and number 3, and this thing here, number 4. These 3 are definitely M6, and I've got some M6 bolts. This should be M6 as well, it would make sense to be that consistent. Countersunk M6 bolts that will go through the top of the deck and locate the router into place. I will probably gain 3mm or 4mm from the plastic plate, so the functional value of the router depth-wise should remain reasonably close. The only other note I'll make is I've got my pocket hole jig. I'm going to pocket hole the top plate mounting to the box itself, so the only surface damage will be the 4 mounting holes for the router itself. Everything else will be smooth. There'll be no edges and shit around the sides. It's a little bit me being OCD, I guess, but also less stuff to catch on sliding things. You'll note the change in what inside looks like original CNC file was a tad snug. Now, drops in nice and neat. When this is inserted in the table, this will be the back. I have a cable tie here which will be used to cable tie the switch on, and then I'll use the Aldi supplied safety switch. We'll have access to the variable speed thingy because that side will be at the front of the machine. What we're going to do now is mark for the holes for the screws. Got me a fancy deep reach pen thingy. Probably should make sure it's reasonably square first. There we go. Do that. And the pen only just reaches. Righto, 1, 2, 3, 4. They're obviously not symmetrical because of the way the holes are on the base, so it means the router only goes in one way. We turn it around a little bit of difficulty. That's all pretty neat. I'm happy enough anyway. Feels pretty strong. Very good. For the lifting of the router itself, I've made a square that's 10 centimeters square. It's on the cutting list. 4 screws that actually line up with the holes for the top of the router there. Obviously this is venting for keeping the motor cool, so putting that into place on there. It's not a perfect fit, but once they're in place, that will then allow the air to breathe around all of the things, and then the jack will push on here and not crush anything soft, is the theory. Okay, moment of truth. Pretty happy with that. That looks like it's gonna work good. So dust extraction, one of the things that was quite a common recommendation or necessity for others who have built a similar sort of router DIY home jobby. Now, I've adjusted the throat on this, or the mouth on this, so that instead of having a coming out here, it sort of goes back a bit and sort of sits like that. So then up inside, it sits up nice and neat on a bracket here, and then got some flexi hose and an angle, 100mm, and then an output here to go to some flexible hose that will run off of this and go up to extract off of the edge of the fence. This hole here as an outlet, now that I'm putting it together, not a great spot, because this is where I'm going to stand when I'm working. Having a hose coming out here, going to be a bit shit. So I'm going to cut a new hole on the side for this to sit into, and this will actually, once in place, sort of hold itself in place reasonably well. So I'll just plug that all up, sort of line it up. It's quite firm, and that will work. Get up in there, you can see where this sits is actually really close to where the mess is going to be. Still have access over this side to get to the locking and the collet and the spanner, and eventually there will be a angle plate that sits there, and you can see I've cut a piece off, and that's to accommodate where the jack will sit, about there. So had to take the guide rail for the fence off in order to access the bolts to remove the external wing table thing, the plastic one, and got some car jacks that are there in case shit goes sideways. What we've got here, piece of angle clamped into place. Got that to sit pretty well. The looks pretty level. The distance from the top of here to the top of there is consistent across here. I have run into a minor challenge, which is this hole here, which is kind of behind, so we'll move that a little bit. So this hole here is right where I've got a screw. This hole here would go into the back plate, which would be good. This hole here will go next to a screw. I have to double check that hole. So this side, I'm going to put in one of these, and that will go into the back. That will be strong enough, and the head will sit flush and hide in there. The other side over here will get the original bolts, which will be just long enough. And then on the back, I don't know what I'm going to do yet. We will cross that bridge when we come to it. So I've done things in a similar fashion for the back to get everything into place. There is actually a 0.5mm fall from that side over there to here, which I will finagle as I drill holes. but so far, so good. So, all back assembled, original saw fence functioning. This jobby will get bolted onto there with the matching holes. The fence for the router will be slightly higher, so this is 100mm, that's 60. It will have to be stepped off of here, so to accommodate here, this will be stepped back and it will sit about here, 50mm off, for dust extraction. Next bit will be to cut a hole in the fence to line up with there. Right, fence has had a hole cut in it and the outrigger spacer things are attached using pocket holes, so nice and smooth. And I'll put a little bit of a pencil round here just for neatness, I guess. Now we get to apply it or attach it to the original table saw component, that to line up. Right, so we lock that down, that's not going anywhere. I'm going to super glue it into place and then detach it and then screw in from the other side to hold it all together. Then chuck this jobby on top there, which will make the dust extraction. Couple paddly pop sticks to hold everything up the appropriate height so that I get clearance to move it back and forth and not have it foul on stuff and things. And looks like everything will come together as it should. Looks pretty good to me. I'll give that a chance to set up. I was going to use accelerator, but sometimes that stuff sets a bit quick. I'd rather wait the 5 minutes and have the opportunity to move things around, you know, in case my test didn't work, but that looks to be about as good as it gets. So here we go, conclusion time. I have since put in the left-hand brace down the bottom. I haven't put the little braces up the top. I don't feel they're necessary at this point, and I like the amount of access I have inside that bottom cavity. There is some consideration to the idea of having a separate fence rather than a shared fence. I'm going to stick with the shared fence at the moment because I think it will suit me, and I'm usually reasonably organised on a project where I'm going to be using two machines like this. If it turns out that I'm not and I need a separate fence, then I'll explore that. What I will be doing at some point is putting a little base plate down in here, so then this can be a cavity for storing tools and bits and pieces and stuff. Extraction, obviously I put a port in the front and then decided I'm going out what is essentially the back of the saw but the side of the router. That suits me because, as you can see, this is mobile. This gets moved around in my workspace and then put usually outside where possible for dust and noise, so on. If you're building this yourself, you probably didn't even need those ports. You could use the hole straight at the back like I've done for the minor extraction there, depending on how you do the internal or underside suction. As far as cost goes, the only thing I actually paid for specifically for this project was my $20 eBay jack. The rest, stuff out of my shed, which is all very well and good for me. If you're going to build this, obviously there's a sheet of form ply. The safety switch came from another tool, but probably not entirely necessary. It's helpful to be able to turn the thing off and on for me. Everything else is pretty basic stuff that you can pick up at Bunnings or, you know, online from places like TimberCon, Carbatec, eBay, and you know, the businesses of that ilk. It's quite a big piece of stuff. It's hanging off the side. Those of you wondering how the balance goes, seems to be pretty good. There's a fair bit of weight there, and you can see, particularly with my setup, the wheels are over there, but it is reasonably stable, particularly when the caster wheels are lifted up and sitting on its rubber feet. I don't feel like it's going to move in a nefarious or annoying way when I'm using it. So there we go. Thanks for watching. I appreciate your time. If this is what you like to see, chuck me a like and a subscribe, and check the comments, make a comment. The cutting list for the form ply will be available, as will the CNC files. Just flick me a message. I'll put my email address in the jobby down below, and I can email them to you. Have yourself a fabulous day. See you soon.